Hoarding was such a big part of who I became. I created a whole life around protecting my family and who I felt we really were. I felt like if anyone was going to tell the story of what it was like growing up in a hoarding home, it should be me. No shoes in the house. We do not want anyone tracking dirt. We have lived together for a little over a year. When he asked what I did for a living, I told him I was a writer. And he said, "What are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on a memoir." He said, "You're 28. What kind of memoir are you writing?"
Well, at first you said that her father suffers from an OCD. This used to be considered an obsessive compulsive disorder. So I thought, does he wash his hands a lot? Does he count 5 times when he knocks? What does he do? And she said, no, he hoards a lot of stuff.
He immediately asked for the check. My father is what I would consider an information hoarder. He really loves books and newspapers and magazines and radios and anything that carries with it some sort of information, something he can learn from. And on the other hand, my mom, who I would not characterize as a hoarder, but as someone who ended up compulsively shopping out of depression. And when I was born, we lived in a house that was very much messy, but I would say clean messy. We moved to another home, and I thought that would be our fresh start, but what ended up happening was that it became filled to a point of such an incredible degree that my parents and I would come home and then we would just separate into the few spots in the house that were enough for someone to sit down. We had completely abandoned our downstairs. Over years of neglect, our pipes had burst and had created a sort of constant flooding in the house if we left the water on, and so we would turn the water off intermittently. So we would shower at a local gym. After my parents moved out of the house when I was 18, the company that bought their house told them that in the attic they had found a man's clothing, a cot, and hundreds of used beer cans. Someone had been living in my parents' attic. I had heard voices in the attic, and when I told my mom about it, she said, "You're probably just hearing the rats," because we had rats. And I never brought it up again, but I always felt like there was someone living with us.
I had an idea of what hoarding was. I didn't imagine, the hard part of squalor, the part where, there were rats scurrying around.
I always felt like I was someone to be ashamed of because where I came from was something to be ashamed of. When I was 18, it was the summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college. I came home for the summer, and the things that had been so normal to me as a teenager, the things that I had just been so used to that I didn't think anything of, well, I couldn't get used to them again. And I took a bottle of painkillers, and I was very lucky because my parents weren't home at the time, but they came home shortly after, and my mom knew immediately. And my father threw me over his shoulder and drove me to the hospital. After I left the ER, I wouldn't let my parents in my hospital room. I wasn't ready to be emotionally responsible for them and how much I'd hurt them in that moment. I just needed to deal with my own emotions at that point. And the first time we actually talked was when my parents snuck in after our family doctor came, so that they could tell me that I never had to go back to that house again. I think that was the worst, best thing I could have ever done, because after that my parents abandoned their house. And I think that saved us all. I have good memories of my home life as a child, and I remember this moment when I was in nursery school. My father was home giving me breakfast, and I wanted to watch Sesame Street, and my mom's rule was that I had to eat at the table. He walked out the front door, and I was totally confused, and he came back about 10 minutes later with all of these broken mirrors that he had kept somewhere. And he proceeded to not say anything, but strategically place each of these mirrors against furniture and books and walls. The image of Sesame Street reflected from one mirror to another, to another, to another, till it got to the mirror right across from me at the kitchen table. I just knew that my father was different, but he was brilliant. It'll never be easy for them. Keeping a clean home will always be work, but they're doing it, and that's what matters.